Hi, Steve Gale here. Today what we're going to do is we're going to use Apache Spark to analyze Apache web server logs. And in particular, what we're going to be looking for is any malicious activity on our Apache web server. But first of all, what we need to do is we need to load the Apache logs into Spark and basically do some data prep to prepare the data so that we can then analyze it in an effective way. So first of all, what we're going to be looking at in this video is how we're going to prepare the Apache log data for analysis. So we have some log data, and where that data is stored, if I just look at my files, I've got in my downloads folder, I've got another folder called DT Apache logs. And in here you can see there's a whole bunch of access logs, which are separate times that these have been taken. So what we'll do is we'll analyze all of these logs and we'll analyze all of these logs. But first of all, we need to, as I mentioned before, we need to do our data prep. So initially what we're going to do is we're going to import the libraries that we need, and we're going to import pandas, and we're going to import matplotlib, and the plot style that we're going to be using is 538. Now, given that we've installed Spark and we're using Pyspark and running this within a Jupyter Notebook, we need to use FindSpark. And before we use FindSpark, we need to import it, and that's assuming that we've already got it loaded onto into our system using pip install FindSpark. But we'll call findspark.init, and that'll allow Python, or that'll allow Jupyter Notebook to find our Spark context. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our Spark context. But to do that, we need to import a series of libraries. So we'll import Spark context. We're also going to import SQL context and Spark session, because we're going to do some of our analysis using Spark SQL and also Spark DataFrames. In the next section here, what we're doing is we're going to create our Spark context, and which is going to be called SC. We create our SQL context, which is going to be created from the Spark context, and also we're going to create our Spark session from our Spark context, and we'll call that Spark. So it's probably a good point to say run a few of these. So we'll just run the first one, import the pandas library, then we'll call FindSpark. Then the next thing we're going to do is configure our Spark variables. Now, if we weren't able to find Spark, we would have a fail here, but as you can see, there was no problems. And here we're going to create our Spark context and our SQL context. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to import regular expressions, or RE, which is our allows us to do regular expressions. And we've already imported pandas, but it looks like we're doing it a second time. But anyway, let's do that. And here what we're going to do is we're going to just test RE. What we're going to do is we're going to use find iter to find a section in Spark which is in this string. And for matching in, what we're going to print is match.start and match.end. So you can see how the iteration, the regular expression find iter is actually working when it finds a match in M. So let's have a look and see what the output to this is. And you can see we've got a match. So, and here you can see that what it's done is it's printed out print match, match start, and match end. So we've got match 0 and match 25. So that's 0, and that looks like it'll probably be 25. But if you look at matching in Pyspark, then we've got a match range between 25 and 36. The next thing we're going to do here is we'll import glob, and we're going to use glob to basically bring in our Apache log files. So you can see here I've got a path, home Steve downloads, DT Apache logs, and star.dgz, and I'm going to import those raw data files. And then when I display those raw data files, you can see it's displaying the path to all of those raw data files that we saw over here in home downloads Apache DT logs, access logs. So here's all of our logs here. So if you download these to a different place, or you'd had a different name here, then you need to obviously update the path according to where you had your Apache log files downloaded. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use spark.read.text, and what we're going to do is we're going to read all of the raw data files, so all of these raw data files, into a base data frame, which we'll call base data frame. So this is a Spark data frame, and then what we can do is we can then print the schema of the data frame. So I'll just run this one first, and then we'll print the schema. And you can see here that there isn't any schema in this data. So what we need to do is we need to do something about this base data frame. We need to manipulate this to essentially create a meaningful and usable schema that we can run queries on. So let's now have a look at the base data frame type. So we'll run this, and you can see that it's a Pyspark SQL data frame. So it's not a pandas data frame, but it's a Pyspark SQL data frame. So it's basically a Spark data frame, which is sort of similar to a pandas data frame, but they are actually different. So the next thing we can do is to have a look at the start of the data frame and look at what our data looks like. And you can see here that this is our raw log data, and you can start to see that we've got IP address, we've got dates, we've got the type of HTTP verb, in this case a GET, we've got the URL, we've got the protocol, we've got the response code, and I'd say this one here is the length, and then it looks like we've got the some information about the client that was being used. The next thing we can do is we can have a look and see how big our data frame is. So if we say here print base data frame count and how many columns we've got, let's run that and see what we get. And you can see here we've got 5,158 essentially records of one column. So there's a single column. All of this is essentially a single column. And then we've got our next record, which is a single column, and our next record, which is a single column. So we need to work around this so that we can essentially subdivide each of these into separate columns. So that's what we'll be doing next. So depending on the size of your log files, this will give you an output to say what size the log files are. So for the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to work on a small sample. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a sample of these, item value for item in base df take 15. So essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to get a small sample that we can just make sure that any of the data manipulation that we're doing is just working on a small amount of data. So let's take that sample, and you can see here's our sample. So we've got this will give us 15 records in the data frame. So here what we can do is we can we can create a host pattern here. And what this is basically a regular expression pattern where what we're looking for is we're looking for the host name out of this. So we want to basically extract the host names out and put this into hosts. So let's have a look at how this regular expression is working. So we've got a string dot another string, and this can then repeat, and then we've finally got a string, and that's the end. So depending on the number of dots, there's a certain number of dots that we can have between our strings, and if we match that condition, then that will be seen to be the host pattern. So here we can do re.search on the host pattern, and then if we find it, then we can then put it into hosts. So if we run this, you can see here that for our first 15 records, what we'll get is 15 hosts coming out. So these are our 15 hosts. First one is 89. The last one is 196, 52, 60, 35. You can see there we're extracting that out. The next pattern we're going to look for is the date pattern, and this has been slightly adjusted because of the time zone or lack thereof. So here what we're looking for is we're looking for 2 decimals followed by a slash, 3 words followed by a slash, 4 decimals followed by a slash, and then a colon. So that's our colon there. Then we've got 2 decimals here and another colon. Then 2 decimals here and another colon. Here's our colon. And then 2 more decimals, and that's the end. So if we match this pattern here, our timestamp pattern, then we can search for the timestamp pattern, and then we can say that that's our timestamps. So this will give us our timestamps, and you can see here that this is functioning reasonably well. This one had plus a 4-digit at the end, and that 4 digits at the end was the plus time zone, but we don't actually have a time zone included in the log data that we have, so that wasn't necessary. The next section where what we're doing is we're looking for our URIs, and we basically want to extract our URIs out of the host. So here's a regular expression for matching URIs within the Apache log files, and basically what we can do is we can then extract these URIs, and when we say method URI protocol, what we'll get, this is our pattern. So this is what this pattern is matching, and it's returning method URI protocol. You can see that here are the URIs being extracted out of the Apache logs. So here's our URIs. So this will tell us the method, in this case get, the directory, and then the path, and also the protocol that's being used. So you can see here, here's a path here and protocol. Here's one for an image, and the protocol as well. So we can run this one. Finally, next one we're going to do is we're going to extract the status pattern, and we've got a status pattern here, and basically what we're looking for is we're looking for a space, 3 decimals, and 3 decimals and a space. So you can see here we've got 3 decimals, space before and a space after, and this will bring back our this status pattern will give us our status codes, 200, 404s, 401s, or whatever the HTTP status code is that is returned from the request. So you can run that, and you can see for our 11 record sample here, we've got 11 status codes. Then the next thing we've got here is the content size, and so with our content size, we're looking for a space and then a decimal number, and then after that, we're looking for a double quote after that. So this will find our content length or content size, and if we run this, you can see here this is the content size that's been extracted for our 11 records. So if we go back and look at our 11 records, content size is here we've got 373 for this one. Down here we've got file screen, looking for this one. Here we go. 79,560. So if we look at these, got 79,560 as our last one, 373 as our first one. So this was obviously matching without any problems what we require. Finally, what we're going to do is we're going to put all of this together. So we've got our host pattern, we've got our timestamp pattern, we've got our method URI protocol pattern, we've got our method URI protocol pattern for the method, for the endpoint, and for the protocol. So we can use that to extract out the method, the endpoint, and the protocol out of that. Then we've got our status pattern and our content size pattern. Now you can see here that what we're going to do is we're going to create a logs data frame out of this, and we're going to work on the full base data frame, not the sample. Because before what we were doing is we were just operating on the sample, which was just for our test data. But here we're going to operate on the whole data frame, and we're going to call base data frame.select, and we're going to select this out. So we're going to get our anything that matches the host pattern, and we're going to provide that with an alias of host. So you can see here that what that'll do is that'll give us essentially a column title of host. The next one is our timestamp pattern. We'll alias that as timestamp, and you can see here that will give us a column name of timestamp. Then we've got method URI, the first part, which is our method. You can see here we can extract just the method component or the get. Then we've got the endpoint being the actual path to the file, or the endpoint. And then we've got the protocol component, which is part of method URI protocol pattern part 3, which is here. And then we've got our status, which is alias status. So you can see here's our status code. And then finally, we alias the content size, and we can use our content size pattern to extract the content size. And this will return us into logs data frame. So what we then do is we call logs data frame show, and we show the first 10 columns, and then we can print the count and print the length. So let's run that and let's see what we get. Take a little bit longer because we're operating on the full data set, not a portion of the data set. And you can see here we've got our formatted data frame. So we've got our formatted data frame, and we've got different columns. So we've got the host column, the timestamp column, and so forth. And we've still got the same number, 5158, but this time, so we've got 5,158 records, but this time we've got 7 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got our full 7 columns. Finally, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look and see if we've got any null values. So we can run this filter-based df value, and we can check to see if any of the values are equal to null. And so if we run this, you can see that our data is pretty good. We don't have any null values. Similarly, we can have a look and see if we've got any bad rows in our logs data frame. So we can do this by saying, is the host equal to null? Is the timestamp equal to null? Method, endpoint, status, content size, and protocol. And by running df.filter, essentially this will be operated on each record. So we can check each record in our logs data frame to see if we've got any bad rows, and we can just count those. So let's run that. And the good sign of that is that we've basically, our data is clean. We don't have any nulls that we've got to deal with. This next section here is basically giving us a count of how many nulls we've got in each section. I won't dwell on this too much because we don't have any dodgy data that we're working with. But you can see here, if we run this, then we've got no nulls, and we worked that out from here that we had no null data points. So this one here would give us a count of any nulls in the base data frame, so we can do a count, and this is for status, and we've got none of those. So this here is going to show nothing. Yep, and finally, bad status data frames. If we wanted to get a count of how many of these occurred, we can basically do a count of those. But given that we don't have any, they're empty, so that's okay. So that's pretty much our. We know that our data is good, which is a good sign. Finally, what we want to do is we want to convert from our timestamp string, which is in this sort of format, which is in string format. But basically what we want to do is we want to turn it into a proper timestamp that we can work with in the format that Apache needs, which is in this sort of format. So what we've got to do, you can see here we've got 29/October/2019. So what we do here is we're creating a month map, and we can map these months. So October would be mapped to the value 10, and so we can use key values to essentially to get that that we can use the key October to get the value 10 out, and then use that value. But the other thing is the format is different. So if you see here, what this parse time, what it's doing is you pass it in the text. So you pass it in this text, and what it's going to do is it's going to go, for example, it's going to get the format. So we've got four decimals, and we're going to get the text from 7 to 11. So the text from 7 to 11, so that's this text. So we're going to grab that text, and we're going to convert that to an integer and format it in here, followed by a dash. So there's our dash. And then the next one, we're going to do the month map, and we're going to grab the text from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 3 to 6. Sorry. 3, 4, 5, 6. So that'll give us our OCT, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is where it finishes. And then we'll grab that text, and we then put that into the month map, and as OCT matches, and then it'll bring back the 10, and then that 10 gets put into the next format, which is here. So that'll be into this will be formatted here. And similarly, this goes right through, and it will then return a time in this format, which we can then convert into a proper timestamp. Finally, you can see what we're doing here is we're going to call parse time, and basically return the time, and then what we can do is we can basically take our logs data frame, and we can run a select query. And if we call UDF parse time, and what we do is we parse the timestamp, then what we can do is we can parse time the timestamp and return the time in the proper format. And then once we've returned the time into the revised format, we can then cast it to an actual timestamp, and then provide a new alias, which is time. So you can see here the alias for this column is now time. And then we can drop the timestamp column. And if we were to then display what that looks like, say in the first 10, show the first 10 records in the DataFrame logs, then what you'll see in the logs DataFrame, the first 10 records, you can see here we've got now our time in the right format, and it's called time as opposed to timestamp. And you can see the revised format there. So we can run this, and we get the desired output. Finally, if we then look at the schema, we can do a print schema, and you can see here we've got our host, which is a string, our method, which is a string, our endpoint is a string, our protocol is a string, the status here is an integer, our content size we've also parsed as an integer, and finally our time is a timestamp. So that's in a timestamp format, so that we can do time operations on that timestamp. The next thing we can do is we can cache all of that by calling logs df cache. So we put that into our cache, and finally, now that we've cleaned up our data frame, we can stop our Spark session. But obviously, the next step is to do some analysis on our data, which is in a much better format for doing analysis on. Okay, well, thanks very much for watching, and we'll then look at the next video, which is doing the analysis on the prepared data of the Apache log file.